Welcome to Theory Underground. What you're about to listen to is the first lecture on Totality and Infinity, but it's also kind of like an exegetical reading, because if you're interested in this text, or if you are trying to read it, if you're wrestling with understanding it, then the chances are you're like, what the hell is going on here? What is he even talking about? Why does he talk like this? And I thought, and I still think, that probably one of the best ways to get grounded in the text to see that he is speaking sense. Like what's going on here is intelligible. And, you just got to kind of get used to his way of talking and kind of unlock some of the key concepts and approaches to this text, and then it'll all work out. So good luck with your reading. I hope that if you are trying to tackle Totality and Infinity, that it will go well for you. If you fall off, give yourself a break and then come back to it later. But ultimately, the chances are this might also be very interesting for people who've never even tried to read it, who might even have no idea what's going on here, because ultimately, Emmanuel Levinas is a super underrated philosopher. And I think that this was a really productive session. And Nance told me afterwards, yeah, man, this whole approach to the text made it so that you were able to talk about a whole bunch of things that you might have otherwise not gotten to. And there's some really important stuff here. So yeah, welcome to the Totality and Infinity course. If you would like to enroll for it, you can get 90% off by becoming a subscriber to my ongoing seminar that I do with my wife. And yeah, it's really cool. We do stuff on a weekly basis on Sundays, and it gives you a 90% discount on my courses, as well as 50% off of all other courses at Theory Underground. And so make sure to check that out if you're interested. Otherwise, just enroll in the course. It starts on August 3rd, goes until the end of August, and then we'll do the second half of Totality and Infinity in January 2025. All right, peace. All right, so the first thing I want to say about this is my apologies to the Totality and Infinity course students. You're all trapped in the nightmare of my drive, being that I have done everything to undermine myself when it comes to the teaching of this course. I have looked into so many theorists that are not Levinas over the year because I've been productively procrastinating on everything. In fact, it's been so productive, this procrastination, that I literally canceled Totality and Infinity and put it off to August, right? It was going to be much earlier in the year. And some people were disappointed when I did that. Other people were relieved because it gave them more time. I felt like it was absolutely necessary that I put it off. But guess what? I feel the exact same way again. So that's how I know it's drive. I know it's just something I just have to do and get out of the way. I'm sorry. That's all I have to say about that. So, it is Sunday, a week before course begins, the Totality Infinity course. And the reason that matters is because this is a sort of pre-recorded lecture for people who are taking this course. And it's one that, you should have seen the email. It said you could join if you wanted to, but you didn't get more than 24 hours of advance notice. And that's kind of why I'm apologizing and saying my drive has something to do with this. Look, I've just ultimately an idiot. Like, I actually thought that my original syllabus had time set aside for the preface. And then when I was going over it 2 days ago, I was like, oh my God, the schedule doesn't actually have a place for the preface. And the preface is like my favorite part of this book. And it's obviously where we're going to start. Nance has it up on the screen. I'm going to go ahead and get it so you can see it as well to the viewers. All right, now we've got the preface up on the screen thanks to Nance, who will be scrolling. Give it up for Nance, everybody. It's so good to have Nance scrolling. Yes, the Nance scrolls. It's our favorite thing. Up here on the whiteboard are notes remaining from the other lecture that I gave today. I have academic theory versus underground theory, machinic versus human. Well, Uh, all I want to say about the previous lecture is that it does introduce Levinas. I do think that um, if you're really excited about the lectures related to this course, that the first lecture is technically the one we just did on escape. Levinas on escape. All I want to say about escape and Levinas right now is that Levinas's escape is a very early essay in his philosophical career, and it aged really well. It actually sets him up for his whole project. Basically, there are so many parts of that where he says, we'll have to get into that later. And as whoever wrote the foreword to that book is saying, like, actually, there is no like early Levinas versus late Levinas where there's some like radical rupture. It's instead just like a steady deepening of the same question and the same set of problems and the same, if not concepts, then like attempts to approach the same phenomena. Um, and it's actually an essay that I didn't know about until very recently, and once I actually learned about it, I got excited about it. And so I really hope that everyone will take the time to read it for themselves. I hope that I inspired people to look into it. It's actually, as far as great works of philosophy go, by some of the most profound thinkers in existence, like one of the most, um, I won't say it's easy, but it's the fact that it's so short makes it something that you can kind of do in a 3 hour sitting. If if you kind of know what's going on, if you kind of have a sense for what's going on. And that's why this entire course has been set up to assume that none of you have done the readings ahead of time. I am not assuming that you did the preface of Totality and Infinity already. And that the reason that's important is because the way I taught Being in Time, it was the opposite. You're supposed to do the reading ahead of time. I think that I really want to drive home the point that I am your secondary text. I am your companion text. You do not need to read any other sort of companion or introductory texts to crack the code to Totality and Infinity. If you feel so inspired, go for it. There are ones that if you really, really want, I can recommend you. But I'm going to discourage it. I'm not going to put it in the group folder so that everybody can go download it or whatever. The only text that I'm going to reference in the next few weeks probably is Simon Critchley's The Problem with Levinas, which is actually an amazing book. It's 4 lectures that he gave. He got hurt and couldn't write a book that he meant to write during a certain period of time. And so what he did instead was he collected a bunch of he took these 4 lectures he gave on Levinas, put them into a book, made some slight edits, and then put it out there. And it's actually really great. It's very engaging. And I know I dunk on Simon Critchley in the trailer for this course, where I'm basically saying, oh, the problem with Levinas is that he's been kind of captured by the politically progressive projects of the likes of Simon Critchley and Judith Butler. That's not fair. Judith Butler and Simon Critchley are the remnants of something very cool. They're actual human beings. It's almost like they're like these, to me, like they're like these elders to the left, but that's part of the problem because they keep the dream alive. And I think the best way, at least for me, to think of them is that they belong to a different epoch of being, to a different historical world. And in their eyes, things kind of continue on the same. But we live in cyber history. We're underground theorists. And so I'm saying we, and I just mean me and Nance and anyone else who wants in on that. But whenever I say cyber history, like Nance and I have been developing this thesis for a while. I'm not trying to lump you all up into this we, right? There's always something very suspicious about any person making assertions and saying we instead of I, because what they do is through making these we statements sort of share responsibility to everybody who's listening in a way that's often disingenuous because it's really just their own particular position, but they're trying to act like it's like, so, oh, well, we all agree. No, no. But that's why I just made it very clear that I'm talking about, the thesis that I've been developing with Nance. You all can have your own theses. It's okay. But with that said, you don't have to read Critchley. In the longer term, some point during this course, I do plan on taking something from Dr. Leswin Laubscher, the former chair of the psychology department at Duquesne University, who I interviewed a couple months ago, as well as Simon Critchley. Both of them attempt to explain otherwise than being in like a paragraph. And it's one of the hardest books to crack in the fucking world. It's absolutely insane to read Levinas trying to break with all grammar, all accepted grammar. And there's something really difficult about what he's trying to accomplish in that text, and they're all profoundly moved by it. But there's been no one taking an attempt at like writing an introduction to Otherwise Than Being, writing a companion to Otherwise Than Being, or writing a comparison between Totality and Infinity and Otherwise Than Being. So for me, I read Totality and Infinity, and then Otherwise Than Being just remains this big mystery that eventually someday I'll dive into, kind of like how I feel like with the Science of Logic or something like that, right? It's just one of those books, The Logic of Sense, like those kinds of books by Hegel or Deleuze where it's like, yeah, I'll get to it eventually. I know it's like one of the hardest pieces of shit in the world, and maybe I should learn the actual language before I even tackle it, because it'd be easier to learn French than to learn the English translation of Levinas. Like that's the suspicion, but it's probably misguided. It actually fetishizes the idea of being able to get some direct access to what was said. And I think that it's very Levinasian to say that it's impossible to get to like the original interpretation of a text, because the author himself, in this case him, doesn't actually know what he's saying sometimes, because he's trying to figure out what this idea is, right? He's working out this idea, which is why Totality and Infinity is called an essay on exteriority. An essay means it's being fleshed out, it's being worked out, it's an idea in progress, in process, etc. Of course, if you're going to spend a lot of time reading anything that prepares you for this text, instead of doing secondary texts, I would say read Existence and Existence, which is by Levinas. Read his essay on Hitlerism. Read his essay on escape. Read his essay on Martin Buber. But you don't have to do any of that to read Totality to read this text, and you could always come back to it later. And honestly, that's my goal and my hope. But you could be all lazy about it and just not do any of the readings for this entire course. And my goal is that you get a shit ton out of it anyway. And it's not real laziness, because the chances are, because you're in this course, you feel the need to transgress against doing what you're supposed to. So you'll feel this tremendous energy to go read other thinkers. And I want to give you your permission slip right now, not just to diffuse that transgression. Yes, that's right. You can't be transgressive when I gave you permission to, but also because it's like me with Seminar 11 by Todd McGowan, or like Leon Brenner's course on the clinical structures. I listen to the lectures. I try to do the readings, but if also I feel more inspired to write, I'm going to go write. And insofar as I fail to read it, it doesn't matter, because the lectures are giving my consciousness or my mind or my unconscious a foothold in the field that come with a bunch of assumptions and sort of big question marks, algebraic placeholders that will get filled in later. And sometimes it takes 6 months to 5 years to build up the psychic sort of, to steal your mind, I guess is what I'm trying to say, to actually get to a text. And so listening to lectures about a text can be part of that process of preparing yourself to actually get to it. Those are all just my own preliminary comments so that people feel less bad for not having done the readings ahead of time, but also There is a benefit to doing the readings, and that is that we will be meeting on Thursdays and Fridays. So that means that after my lecture this Saturday, you will hopefully be somewhat inspired to go do the reading yourself. And then after doing the reading, you can come prepared to discuss questions you have about the reading either Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern or Friday at noon Eastern. And Friday at noon Eastern, Terrence will be there with the French the French original, and any questions of translation we'll be able to get into. And I do have questions of translation because sometimes this is a rather poetic text, and sometimes it's just very confusing what he's saying. You don't have to come to Thursday or Friday. You can come to both. You don't have to have done the reading to come to either one. It's just something that you can do that I wish I'd done during being in time. Okay. With that, we're going to turn to the preface. Everyone will readily agree that it is of the highest importance to know whether we are not duped by morality.
It's pure ideology.
Oh my God, that was an accident. That was so good. That's the best accident. Is it a pure ideology? So I'm going to put morality equals lie, ideology, useful fiction, naive, question mark. It is of the utmost importance to know if we're duped by morality. Why? It's going to change how we live. If it turns out that morality is bullshit, it will change how we approach everything and everyone in our lives, including our own selves. He says, does not lucidity, the mind's openness upon the true, consist in catching sight of the permanent possibility of war? This is like kind of a really quick change of pace, right? All we're doing is asking, wouldn't everybody agree that we know if we're not duped by morality? And then he's like, basically, it seems like the most commonsensible thing of all is that, and like the most obvious thing is that we live in the face of the constant possibility of war. He says the state of war suspends morality. It divests the eternal institutions and obligations of their eternity and rescinds ad interim the unconditional imperatives, which would be to say like the categorical imperative, utilitarianism, virtue ethics, all of these time-honored ethical traditions, as well as the institutions that shape our lives. All of their rules, all of their laws, all of that gets suspended the moment war is what we're engaged in. Oh, it's time for war. Forget about morality, guys. The state of war suspends morality. In advance, its shadow falls over the actions of men. War is not only one of the ordeals, the greatest of which morality lives, it renders morality derisory, right? What does derisory mean? It's like one of these words where it's like, what the fuck, dude? But actually, derisive has to do with deriding, right? We deride somebody when we're putting them down, when we're mocking them, when we're ridiculing them, when we're like, that doesn't matter. So then to repeat it, war renders morality a joke. Something you can roll your eyes at. Obviously, the two best examples of that would be Nietzsche and Marx. So for Marx, class war renders morality derisory. And in a sort of sense, same for Nietzsche, who would say, yeah, it's the war between the masters and the slaves not being able to win against the masters, just simply invert the value framework and say, oh, because I'm weak, because I'm humble, because I'm, a loser, therefore I'm actually pure and better, because those conquerors, those achievers, those great men of history, they're a bunch of bastards actually, because you kind of have to be evil to win, right? So both Nietzsche and Marx set up this, they epitomize this standpoint, even though Levinas will not name them here. I think we should think of them and Carl Schmitt. I think we should think about Leon Trotsky and Carl Schmitt as political theorists who see things in this way where any question of morality should be thrown out the door. That's a waste of time. That's little kids shit. That's naive, right? He says the art of foreseeing war and of winning it by every means, politics, is henceforth enjoined as the very exercise of reason. Politics is opposed to morality as philosophy is to naivete. So philosophy challenges naivete, and politics challenges morality. Now, of course, we'll be doing next year political philosophy with Benjamin Studebaker. You'll see this in Plato with the Republic, the need for the royal lies, right? The noble lies is the proper term, I think. And all the way down, or up, however you look at it, to people like Hobbes and Machiavelli, the ultimate goal is maintaining peace. War secures peace. 2,500 years of Western political philosophy say that war is a thing that, if we do it properly, can secure us a peaceful status quo. But Levinas is going to draw this big question mark over that. Ultimately, what he's going to be getting at here is, no, there's a peace that is not conditioned by war. And it's not even something that belongs to being. It's not even something that can be made sense of in history itself. It's almost like messianic peace. It's almost like some kind of a religious thing, except he's not going to do this dogmatic reliance on religion. He's not going to do this sort of, we'll see where it goes, but it's very important for me to sort of preface this with saying he wants to show cold-nosed, hardcore realists, hey guys, actually, there is something else here. So he's not going to make appeals to God, right? He's not going to do that. He's going to operate within the skeptical parameters established by philosophy. He says, we do not need obscure fragments of Heraclitus to prove that being reveals itself as war to philosophical thought, that war does not only affect it as the most patent fact, but as the very patency or the truth of the real. And of course, there is a wonderful fragment from Heraclitus that I can't share off the top of my head that Heidegger ends up writing about. And it's essentially saying that there's nothing more real than war. War is the real. In war, reality rends the words and images that dissimulate it to obtrude in its nudity and in its harshness. Harsh reality. This sounds like a pleonasm. Harsh object lesson. At the very moment of its fulguration, When the drapings of illusion burn, war is produced. When the drapings of illusions burn, war is produced as the pure experience of pure being. These are the kind of sections that I really want to ask Terence about. And so I just put big question marks on the side of them because it's almost like it seems like it's probably just bad translation when it says at the very moment of its fulguration, when the drapings of illusion burn, war is produced as the pure experience of pure being. Like what do you mean by burn, war? Like what does that even mean? But harsh object lesson means, yes, we were all naive and then war happened and now we're sober and we're stone cold motherfuckers. We get it. We understand what reality is. What's the chat say? I can't see it from here.
I just said it's missing a couple comments, like at the very moment of its fulguration, when the drapings of illusion burn, war is produced as the like.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. Yeah, that's good. That's great. Yeah, it's fantastic. Okay. The ontological event that takes form in this black light is a casting into movement of beings hitherto anchored in their identity, a mobilization of absolutes by an objective order from which there is no escape. That is, in a sort of sense, a good description of how we all feel when we think about how our current situation is made up of deadlocks that foreclose any real future. He says the ontological event, meaning war, that takes form in this black light is a casting into movement of beings hitherto anchored in their identity. So, prior to the war, these humans are anchored in their identity, but then this black light inverts everything and reduces them into these absolutes that are mobilized, or the mobilization of absolutes by an objective order from which there is no escape. This is a really good description of what he means by totality. I often talk about totality like it's, oh, don't totalize me, or, oh, you're totalizing the other, because we assume we know everything about somebody else because of who they voted for, or we know everything about the other person because they're a Muslim or a Jew, right? We think we know everything there is to know about a person based off of very little. That can be totalization. But totalization in its extreme sense is war and the state of war. And so when people do political reasoning and theory as stone cold realists and do apologetics for absolute brutality and inhumanity, they're making appeal to this kind of totalization. And honestly, we could just use a shorthand and say they've got totalized brains. Like a person who justifies the Holocaust has totalized brains. Totalized brain syndrome. But so does the person who makes the excuse for, Trotsky at Lenin's behest going and killing all of those guys at the Kronstadt rebellion. Right? Totalized brains. You're like, well, shit. Some eggs are going to have to get busted to make an omelet, He says the trial by force is the test of the real. And this is actually kind of related to what we were translating, Nance Dilthey's essay about what is real is that which gives resistance, right? The trial by force is the test of the real. So in a scientific experiment, you manipulate an object in certain ways, and then you find what's repeatable and what can be ascertained or validated by other people as well, right, through the repetition of the experiment. And if it wasn't repeatable in this way, you wouldn't be meeting resistance in the ways that you are through the experiments. So we are scientifically, in this case, getting at the real through what gives resistance. Yes, but how much more so do we find out what's really real through the ultimate test of the real, which is the trial by force? He says, but violence does not consist so much in enduring and annihilating persons. Okay, violence is not just hurting people. He says, as much as in interrupting their continuity, making them play roles in which they no longer recognize themselves, making them betray not only commitments, but their own substance, making them carry out actions that will destroy every possibility for action. Every veteran broken by the things that they've had to do in the name of war and the trial by force for politics. The ultimate violence is not the raping and killing that the soldier does to make his side win. No, the ultimate violence is what's done to that soldier who gives himself over to being a mechanism of an inhumane process. That's literally what he's saying here. It's one of the most profound statements. No, violence is not the actual rape and killing. It's the rapist killing. The rapist killing is doing the ultimate violence first to himself. The worst thing that he's doing is something he's doing to himself because he still has to live with himself. Statistically, some of them won't have to live with themselves, right? But the ones who continue living have to carry that burden or be crushed by it. Or refuse the responsibility of carrying that burden and evade it by drinking themselves senseless for the rest of their lives and probably perpetuating more harm when they're blackout drunk or near, by neglecting children, by beating wives, by continuing to rape or get in fights or just basically when you don't shoulder your responsibility, the responsibility of being human, of being a dignified, noble subject, as Levinas will think of it. When you fail to do so, the repercussions of your failure ripple out and ruin everyone else's fucking life, if not just their day. Rendering yourself non-recognizable through the actions that you commit is the worst violence for Levinas, which is a very sympathetic thing. What he's saying is that the worst violence was not the one committed to the Jews by the Nazis, but the one that the Nazis committed to themselves by carrying out the Holocaust. They're the ones who have to live with it. And actually, this book is dedicated. Let's see if I can find a dedication. Wait, where is it? Is it after the preface? What the hell? I thought that there's a dedication that says something about the Shoah, the survivors of the Holocaust, the something. I'm pretty sure there is. I just can't find it. Just believe me. Anyway. Not only modern war, but every war employs arms that turn against those who wield them. It establishes an order from which no one can keep his distance. Nothing henceforth is exterior. That's a definition of totality. Nothing is exterior. Everything is explained. Everyone knows their role. You're either with us or against us. War does not manifest exteriority, outsideness. War does not manifest exteriority and the other as other. It destroys the identity of the same. The same is the self. It's a very interesting way of talking. And it gets really annoying once a Levinasian gets entrenched in the dogma. Because they'll refer to the same and it's you mean you? You mean yourself? It's a weird way to talk about it, Levinas. But the same is juxtaposed to the other. So it actually makes sense. Same versus other. It actually makes sense. You just got to get used to it. The visage of being that shows itself in war is fixed in the concept of totality, which dominates Western philosophy. Individuals are reduced to being bearers of forces that command them unbeknown to themselves. The meaning of individuals, invisible outside of this totality, is derived from the totality. Yeah? Everything you need to know about a person is explained by the worldview that needs you to go to war. The unicity of each present is incessantly sacrificed to a future appealed to bring forth its objective meaning. For the ultimate meaning alone counts. The last act alone changes beings into themselves. They are what they will appear to be in the already plastic forms of the epic. Right? Like, it's through instrumentalization in an arms race for either knowledge or the security of power or of profit that reduces everybody to their functions. He just described the functionalist worldview. He didn't sit here and say it's Talcott Parsons and Nicholas Luhmann and all the tech bros, but he did just say it. For our purposes, that's what he just said. For the ultimate meaning alone counts. The last act alone changes beings into themselves. They are what they will appear to be in the already plastic forms of the epic. The plastic forms of the epic is the functionalist story about what we are, whether it's an evolution to a techno-singular AI in the future, or if it's uploading ourselves in some other way that does something else, or, but it's to say, like, we have a meaning. Humans have a meaning. It's in the future. We're destined towards that end. Everything else is meaningless outside of how we fit into this narrative. This is a meta-narrative, right? All meta-narratives that are teleological in this sort of sense do this reduction of everyone to ultimately like how they play a part in this thing. Like Democrats and Republicans right now, people who are super, super red versus blue minded, where everything's hinging on this election. Oh, the other side is so stupid. Oh, the other side, they're so bad. Oh, they're so bad. They're pedophiles, they're groomers, they're murderers, they're racists. Oh, they're so bad. Oh, they're going for the children. Oh, they're so bad, right? This is the with us or against us, all or nothing mindset of totalization. And it's a standpoint that cannot hear nuance, cannot see difference, cannot understand exteriority. Exteriority would be everything that overflows or cannot fit into that framework. It's the human outside of this instrumentalized apparatus that is going to decide, or like is supposed to decide whether we're good or bad, whether we played our part or not, whether history will smile on us or not. He says the moral consciousness can sustain the mocking gaze of the political man only if the certitude of peace dominates the evidence of war. The moral consciousness can sustain the mocking gaze of the political man. Remember on the previous page when he said that war renders morality derisory, mockable? Well, here the mocking gaze of the political man is directed towards this moral consciousness, right? But the moral consciousness can sustain that mocking gaze only if there's a certitude of peace that can dominate the evidence of war. Now, is he saying that that's true, that there's a literal peace that can overcome that mocking gaze? Or is he saying, practically speaking, someone like Gandhi can only be vindicated if there was a plausible path to peace? But if there's not a plausible path to peace, then someone like Gandhi is just, it's a waste of time. Just laugh at him, right? Such certitude is not obtained by a simple play of antitheses, dialectics. He says the peace of empires issued from war rests on war. It does not restore to the alienated beings their lost identity. For that, a primordial and original relation with being is needed. This primordial and original relation with being, we just have to put a big question mark there. Is that what he's saying can be achieved through what he's trying to do? I think so. But obviously he's saying that the peace of empires issues from war. It rests on war, which makes sense for the United States empire, for which there is no military competitor, where we have boots on the ground of over 150 countries. The constant expansion of the military budget, the constant arms race to refine our weaponry and our strategies is supposed to be what's securing us peace. He says morality will oppose politics in history and will have gone beyond the functions of prudence or the canons of the beautiful to proclaim itself unconditional and universal when the eschatology of messianic peace will have come to superpose itself upon the ontology of war. Yes, I use that word, messianic peace. And here he is actually indeed saying it. But what is this eschatology that he's talking about? The eschatology of messianic peace. Well, in theology, eschatology has to do with the end times. The Genesis has to do with the coming into being of things, and eschatology has to do with kind of like the end of the story, the final judgment day. Now, he's not, like I said, going to make this argument from the standpoint of eschatology, but he will spend the next 3 pages talking about why eschatology matters. Traditionally, eschatology is a very powerful thing that combats this Western political philosophy bro, hard-nosed realist account, right? You can be Hitler with the final solution or Stalin with the great purges and the show trials. You can be that person. Or I could say, you could be like the United States CIA killing millions of Indonesians, right? Who happened to be socialists, and so therefore they were slaughtered. But you can do these things as a cold, hard realist when you don't think you'll have to answer for it. Eschatology brings in the idea that you do have to answer for it. Now, how does that play out? In traditional Baptist, evangelical, Christian fundamentalist sort of worldviews, it's literal. There is an end times. It is coming. Whether Christians have to live through those end times or they get raptured is a debate had within the church. But ultimately, there will be a final day of judgment. Everyone will have their entire lives on display, and they will be judged before the throne of God. Okay. Well, that's not the traditional Judaism, which I can't sit here and totalize traditional Judaism, but it's not the standard interpretation of the Torah or the Talmud, right? It's like where Levinas is coming from when he talks about eschatology. It's going to have a different meaning, but he's using it in this way where it's kind of a placeholder. He doesn't mean how you as a Baptist or how you as an atheist think about it. He's just saying the very idea of end times itself, eschatology, this open question of having to confront the lives that we've lived, however that's to play out, whether it be through reincarnation, whether there's karma involved, it doesn't matter. What matters is that eschatology puts this question mark over things that a secular, sort of hard-nosed realist, evolutionary story of us being little specks made up of accidental stardust in a infinite universe, like kind of renders unintelligible or meaningless. Like, though it's all accidental, none of this will be remembered. None of it matters. Well, that makes it really easy to be this sort of cold-nosed realist. That's what he wants to combat. And he's saying, traditionally, eschatology, it has the possibility of this sort of messianic peace because people can live in reference to that. They can say, yeah, you all serve the world with its politics. I serve this other world. I serve this other world, this world that wherein you will be held accountable, right? So he's saying, yeah, that has traditionally played this role. Now, he hasn't, if you're just reading the letters and you want to be really literalist here, he didn't say on the page what I've already said. I'm extrapolating on my understanding of the rest of this preface. Okay, so, potentially I could be wrong here, but I do, this is my understanding of how he treats eschatology. He says, philosophers distrust it. They distrust eschatology. He says, to be sure, they profit from it to announce peace also. They deduce a final peace from the reason that plays out its stakes in ancient and present day wars. Kant, wrote an essay famously on perpetual peace and the kind of state order that would have to be set up to render possible perpetual peace. So he's saying, yeah, philosophers can benefit from talking about peace. But he says they found morality on politics, right? But for them, eschatology, a subjective and arbitrary divination of the future, the result of a revelation without evidences, tributary of faith, belongs naturally to opinion. So it's just like, oh yeah, sure. So you think that there will be karma and reincarnation, and my parents believe there will be like a final judgment before the literal throne of God, and even if you did a lot of good acts throughout your life, if you're not saved by the blood of Christ, you're fucked, homie. Like, that's your opinion. I don't give a shit. Fuck you. He's saying that's kind of the philosopher's, position here. That's just your opinion, man. However, I should actually have a soundbite from the Big Lebowski. That's just like your opinion, man. However, the extraordinary phenomenon of prophetic eschatology certainly does not intend to win its civic rights within the domain of thought by being assimilated to a philosophical evidence. Right? No prophet who ever talked about eschatology, who never put forward eschatological assertions or said this is the way it's going to be. No, they're not arguing with philosophers, okay? He says in religions and even in theologies, eschatology, like an oracle, does indeed seem to complete philosophical evidences. Its belief conjectures mean to be more certain than the evidences, as though eschatology added information about the future by revealing the finality of being. I mean, this would be true of historical and dialectical materialism if the history of class war is leading to an actual end of history where there are no more classes and true justice has been achieved, right? That belief is the bedrock of both Marxism and most Marxism and progressivism. Both take the side of history and say history will be the judge. Now, in religion, eschatology it has to do with God and the last days, the final judgment, reincarnation, whatever. But for these secular, materialist, politically progressive worldviews, no, it's going to be literal. It's going to be on this earth. And whether history smiles on you or not decides whether you've succeeded or not. This is why people say history will not remember you so fondly. Right? That is an eschatological statement, whether it be religious or not. And actually, it's powerful. Like he just said, it can work in the favor of a philosopher to say it. Right? It's a powerful thing to say. I say it. In that piece I wrote on Nina Power, like I was basically saying, like, look, Dale Tutt's reaction and getting on the bandwagon of canceling her, it's not going to be remembered well by history. This decade of censorship and cancellations and unpersoning people and throwing them into the supposed garbage can of history, that won't be remembered favorably by history. Okay, but when I say that, that's my opinion. That's just some bullshit. I'm just I'm hedging my own bet, right? And then right back at me, somebody can say, well, actually, you're like you're doing this other thing that's, arguably like reactionary apologetics. Like you're saying that people should be able to whatever. And it all comes down to opinion with eschatology is what he's saying, which is why he's not going to base his philosophy on eschatology, but he still wants to argue, look, see how far it gets you. See how people constantly go to it. Even if they're secular, people still make this appeal to history. Well, I've kind of branded this course and this text and Levinas's thought in general as something that is anti-political and anti-history. It's anti-history in the sense of this idea that what you do doesn't matter if it doesn't make it into a history book or profoundly shape the trajectory of history. That idea itself is something that he is going to radically suspend in a way that no philosopher had ever done before him. That idea that you've got to make your mark on history. Like I think of Hamilton and the song, History Has Its Eyes on You, right? That shit is so good, right? I don't know if you don't love that song, then you just haven't listened to it enough yet. It is actually a banger. But that idea that history has its eyes on you is how all of the founding fathers felt. It's why they talk about posterity. Posterity means your children's 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 children. It means how you'll be remembered, how your legacy will be received. They cared so much about that. In fact, when you read the founding fathers, nowhere in the history of ideas is it more clear that they are writing to a future audience. They don't give a fuck most of the time when they're writing about their actually existing others, their concrete others. They care about this future generation that's going to receive their legacy. And this is why when Benjamin Franklin and John Adams had to share a bedroom in Paris and they fought about whether the window should be open or closed because like one of them wanted the window open, the other one wanted it closed, and they fought about it. They both wrote about the argument in their journals, and both of them said that they had won the argument. That's the way that the founders were. They were writing to posterity. They only cared about history, which means that when Trotsky, correct me if I'm wrong here, ex-Trotskyite Nance, but it was a Central Committee meeting, right? One of the Bolsheviks, I think, maybe it was Menshevik at the time, I don't know, got up and stormed out. He said he protested the decision, whatever it was that was being made, and was like, no, man, I'm out. And as he leaves, Trotsky said, to the dustbin of history with you. Is that how it went, Nance? Am I right?
Yeah, man, to the dustbin of history.
Levinas is the first philosopher I'm aware of to write a whole book, much less even propose the idea, that the dustbin of history might be, in some cases, the noble thing, the realer thing, and in some way, it's not just forgotten. It's not just like it fades off into the past and is forgotten about forever. And no, there's something else in this idea that he's trying to get at. So then he says, well, I have to go back. He says, but when reduced to the evidences, eschatology would then already accept the ontology of totality issued from war. Its real import lies elsewhere. It does not introduce a teleological system into the totality. It does not consist in teaching the orientation of history. Eschatology institutes a relation with being beyond the totality, or beyond history, and not with being beyond the past and the present. Not with the void that would surround the totality and where one could arbitrarily think what one likes and thus promote the claims of a subjectivity free as the wind. It is a relationship with a surplus always exterior to the totality, as though the objective totality did not fill out the true measure of being. as though another concept, the concept of infinity, were needed to express this transcendence with regard to totality, non-encompassable within a totality, and as primordial as totality. As primordial as totality. I'm going to go put the infinite sign over here, infinity, and juxtapose it to war, and just leave it at that for now. He's now introduced the concept of infinity. He's saying it's like the idea of eschatology wants to get outside of or go beyond being. It's not evidence of some teleology that can be shared within the totality, within the existing dominant instrumentalized framework. No, it's an appeal to there's got to be something more. We as human beings know there is something more. The person who's standing there sending people into the gas ovens or what have you, or the people who are perpetuating the rape of non-king or whatever, like these extreme brutal acts, like these people feel like they can do anything, that there is no, I'm sorry, that who's going to rat them out? Who's going to report them to the authority? They can do anything they want. History doesn't have its eyes on them. They get to write history. They're the winners. They're putting everything on the ability to be the victors who will write the history books, who will tell the stories that they want later on. And Levinas is saying, you know what? These appeals to some kind of eschatology, though he's not going to base his philosophy on that, let's just say it gets at something, though. And let's just put a big old question mark on what it is that eschatology is getting at, and let's just call it infinity, okay? An algebraic placeholder. He says this beyond the totality and objective experience. So this beyond is not just beyond the totality, it's also beyond objective experience, is, however, not to be described in a purely negative fashion. It is reflected within the totality and history, within experience. Oh shit, son. So he's saying that infinity, this beyond, is something that we can talk about phenomenologically. Oh, okay. He says the eschatological, as the beyond of history, draws beings out of the jurisdiction of history and the future. It arouses them and calls them forth to their full responsibility. I think of Game of Thrones, and if it's okay if you don't get the reference, it's fine. The Hound is a guy who does extremely brutal things. He's a real fucked up guy who does real fucked up shit. And there's a character arc where he doesn't like it. He doesn't like what he's been. He doesn't like what he's become. In part, his relationship with Arya has put him in touch with something human. We could even talk about him being put in touch with natality itself through Arya. There's something beautiful in that whole story. Oh my God, it gives me goosebumps. Well, at one point, when he's pretty much carried out his mission, and he's more or less redeemed himself, he doesn't really know what to do now. I mean, okay, I think Arya beat the living shit out of him and tried to kill him, and then she went off and did her own thing. But now he's free to do something else because he's more or less like, he almost died. Now he's been brought back. He's got like some opportunity to lead a new life. He ends up like connecting with these people who are all about peace and love, right? Do you remember this part, Nance? He connects with like this community of people. I forget what they were all about, but I think there was some kind of like a leader, kind of like a pastor figure who was all about peace. And the Hound, he's like, okay, I'll help you guys out. I'm not really convinced by all of this, but you know, I'm kind of open to it. Like, it's a cool idea. Like, I want to be a good person. You guys are good people, right? So I want to redeem myself. So he's trying to help out, build them like their new little world. One day he's out, I think, like gathering firewood, and then he comes back and literally every one of them is dead. So much for this messianic peace, right? Game of Thrones is probably the single best, especially the first 5 seasons, okay? The single best story that lays out why morality is derisory, right? If you just watch the first few episodes, that you know Ned Stark, he's the guy who's like, brace yourself, winter is coming, right? The guy who plays Boromir in Lord of the Rings, like he's that guy, that iconic meme. And he is the most noble, pious, loyal man. He is kind of pure, except that he's got a secret, and it's and you don't really know what it is, but he's got a demon that he's got. And part of it is like people believe that he actually cheated on his wife, right? And so he's got this bastard son, and it's like this problem because he is such a morally upstanding guy, yet he's got this bastard son, and it humiliates his wife just to see Jon Snow, right? Well, Ned Stark, the whole first season revolves around Ned. And look, I don't believe in spoilers. I don't believe in them. If you do, just close your ears. But Ned gets his head chopped off. Ned goes bye-bye. Not only Ned, a couple seasons later, basically everybody in his fucking family gets iced, dude. Like, the Red Wedding is one of the most insane things in cinematic history. Right? Nance, would you agree? I don't know. Like,
Yeah, so I read the books before I watched this show, and reading the Red Wedding,
oh my God, dude.
like it was horrible. It was like, I don't want to keep reading this series. Like it did break my spirit. I mean, it's a stupid book, right? But it really did. It broke my spirit. And at the time I didn't realize why, but no, it very much was. It was like, oh, morality is out the window. There are no good guys. It was
right.
like
the good guys.
If there are good guys, they're getting murked.
If there are good guys, they're getting murked. And by being good, they got their whole family killed. Ned Stark trying to do the right thing and being honest and principled in his interactions at King's Landing when he was dealing with the royal family got him wrecked. Like he's literally honest with Cersei. The worst thing that he could have possibly done was be honest with Cersei and give her some time to come to justice or whatever. No, dude. He had to, by the rules of the game, he had to stack the deck against his enemies and then be absolutely ruthless. He just had to be more cunning and lying and ruthless and do it for his family. Ultimately, that's what Cersei's approach is. Cersei is a realist in this sense. Cersei cares about nothing but her family, specifically her children, and she will go to any length to stack the deck and outgame the enemies that potentially undermine her children's lives. Of course, that also backfires, right? So it's nice that George R.R. Martin leaves open the complexity of the situation, because that shit backfires on Cersei as well. She takes that too far. But this whole story is this kind of like, oh, actually the deontological, principled, trying to will the universal and do what's right approach of Ned Stark is derisory. War, the realities of war, render it derisory. And the Hound, through his redemption arc, ends up just rediscovering the brutality of war. You know, he was living in this utopian heaven where, oh yeah, we'll all just fucking have our little anarchist commune. Oh, everyone's dead now. And then he just has to go on living. And thankfully he does carry out some vengeance on those motherfuckers. But Like I said, you don't have to watch the show, but now if you do, I hope you'll watch it thinking about political realism versus Levinas. This is what he's ultimately trying to get at. And it is the presupposition of the 20th century, the most totalitarian century in the history of the world, the most mechanized, instrumentalized, all or nothing century that we've ever known. We are children of peace. We were born into a world of peace. Yes, sure, the war in Iraq. Sure, yes, the war in Vietnam. Sure, yes, 100,000 other fucking little wars that we don't even know about. We've got fucking SEALs dropping in through the ceiling, fucking assassinating people every couple of days. And that has been going on our entire lives. That is just reality. But we live in these bubbles. We are children of peace. We've never seen just our own homes or towns obliterated. We haven't just walked out and there's just bodies laying in the streets. Maybe in other countries, but not in our own, right? Now we can go on Instagram and be like, oh my God, look how bad it is over there, right? Levinas doesn't have that luxury or privilege. He's not part of that generation. He belongs to a generation of people who can't talk. He belongs to a generation of people who don't know how to respond. One of the biggest problems with Norman Finkelstein's Holocaust industry is he's going to highlight the fact that the Jewish community was more or less silent about the Holocaust for 20 years, right? It only becomes this industry later. And when I say it becomes an industry later, it's because people make their entire careers being I'm the Jew. I represent the Jews. Listen to me, guys. I'll tell you what the Jewish community really thinks, right? The rise of the Israel lobby, the rise of the state of Israel, using the Holocaust as an apologetic or the legitimation narrative for carrying out terrible brutalities to Palestinians. What Norman Finkelstein is writing about in that book, ultimately, is the ideology of the Holocaust. Yes, the Holocaust is real, he says, but it's become ideology. And it's become ideology in two ways. One, Jews can do anything they want, specifically, not just Jews, but we mean the state of Israel, right? That's this. People constantly do this nowadays. They'll talk about Jews this, Jews that. They mean Israel, right? But it becomes this narrative of, oh, well, they could do what they want because they were so persecuted, right? And on the other side, it's the only worst tragedy to ever exist. It is Disneyland, going back to the earlier lecture. The Holocaust is Disneyland in the sense that what it erases is that genocide's actually part of normal history, right? Look, the problem with the Holocaust industry is the problem with every marginalized identity that eventually gets centered by the institutions. When you have these PMC people whose only access to recognition, representation, or a real career, any kind of power, is by being I represent the interests of this, historically oppressed group. So it's not a problem unique to Jews. All right. But with that said, we should be on alert and we should take it as a big red flag whenever any spokesperson for any group acts like the inhumanities committed against their group throughout history render the rest of the bad things that are done inconsequential, right? So it's oh no, the genocide of the Native Americans, that's the worst thing ever. That we just need to censor that. Oh no, it's actually the Holocaust. We need to censor that. Oh, and then of course, white people be actually, do you know what the British were doing to the Irish and the Scots for hundreds of years before we even knew about you motherfuckers? You know about how vicious and vile and evil Black people were to Black people in Africa for thousands of years, selling each other into slavery. These things. The point is that there's a grain of truth to all of these positions, but what none of them are able to sit with is that this mindset of war and totalization is the ultimate violence, insofar as it renders us all one-dimensional. Now, with all that said, Norman Finkelstein, his big stupid moment in the Holocaust industry is acting like the Jewish community being quiet for 20 years about this issue somehow means that it was just like, what? It took a while for some people to have the gall to come and exploit it. And ultimately Jews were kind of like, on to the next thing. No, dude, when you're fucking like absolutely devastated and you've lost most of your family members and your people didn't have anywhere to go and nobody wanted to accept you and you were fucking killed like chickens in an industrial farm, it's going to take a while to process that shit. Like that's the part that he seems to be missing, is like, yeah, the silence for that period of time actually speaks to the horror of it because it took so long to process. But I do, and I will keep going back to, I do think we need to keep going back to the Holocaust industry in this course as this sort of bitch slap to the face of anybody who really wants to read this text and only think about Jews and the horrors of the Holocaust. No, it's a great example. It's a great example, and it obviously inspires this text. And Levinas lost every one of his family members except for his wife to the Holocaust. And so, yeah, the Holocaust is one of the worst things in the fucking history of humanity. Absolutely. But the point of the Holocaust industry is that horror becomes this kind of cachet in this fucking victim culture where, to be critical of Israel would be anti-Semitic, right? So that's what's going on in the Holocaust industry. So definitely read Norman Finkelstein's work on that. It's very important. And of course, to these kind of grifters, these identity grifters, it would just be a bad book or it'd be anti-Semitic or whatever. It's not. Finkelstein, as complicated of a figure as he is, he's got a goddamn good point in that book. And it is, in a sort of sense, like the counter to this. But we have to talk about the uniqueness of anti-Semitism and how that comes up the moment people start talking about what's happening to Palestinians, right? Which, I'll just say it, one of my favorite people on the internet and a collaborator and fellow traveler, Samuel Loncar, that was his only response, right? His only response to everything going on was, there's a unique kind of evil in anti-Semitism, and it's the biggest thing. And it's like, if that's the biggest thing to you, while little fucking babies are being killed in the thousands by the state of Israel, and the state of Israel is saying, oh no, anyone who criticizes us is anti-Semitic. If that's your biggest concern in that moment, you got to read the Holocaust industry. That's what I would say. Just go read it. I'm not saying you're bad or evil, or just, you need some perspective. Okay. Do you have something you would add to that, Nance? Because I saw you like animated, and I want to stop talking for a second while I get some more water downstairs.
No, just that yeah, saying the Holocaust is Disneyland. And it is a callback to the lecture from this morning that is not connected to this video at all. So just to unpack that, just Baudrillard's statement on Disneyland, how Disneyland is this like infantilized place. But what it really is it kind of covers up the fact that America is an infantile nation. So it's ideology. It's the thing that kind of represents the height or the perfection of a thing or a phenomenon or a notion. But what it actually does is it covers up that thing or that phenomenon or that notion everywhere else it exists in the world. So the Holocaust being Disneyland, yes, it was horrific. It being the worst, I don't know. I think it's weird to try to qualify and put degrees on stuff like that. But sure, call it the worst historical genocide, whatever. That kind of covers up the fact that it's happening right now, and it's happening in support of everything we do, our clothes, our cell phones, our videos on the internet, all the videos of all the cute kitties on the internet, like rest on this bed of genocide and war and horror. I don't know. I think that point is not one that should be like easily brushed off. Like, yeah, we are complicit, and that's not to do like the bleeding heart. Oh, I'm such a rad lib. I'm going to wash my hands. But no, like if you really come to the understanding that like you are complicit, and the only pathway of like resolution is to own it and be like, yeah, we do live in this fucked up, horrible place. It is a fucked up, horrible system. But instead of fetishizing it and taking up this symbolic cause of, I will be the champion of this, insert oppressed category here, so that you can wash your hands of the blood. No, that's actually intensifying your complicity.
Right.
We're all guilty of it. I was a vegan for so long because I thought those factory farms were such horrible places, and they are horrible places.
They are.
But also, like, the farmers that pick my fucking celery are treated inhumanely too.
Fuck. Yeah, man. Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, I mean, I feel responsible for saying all of that because I don't believe that the discourse around Levinas has ever really reconciled itself to that. You get Judith Butler on the one side saying that Levinas says that the Palestinian has no face, which would be pretty fucking insane if he actually said that, and then she could quote it directly, but he doesn't actually say that. It's instead, she deduces that on his sort of silence on something, but it's like, yeah, you can read this preface and then know what he's going after, which is that he's not going to play this standard political activist game that she's playing. But also, like, I don't think you're going to get it from Simon Critchley either, right? Like, the new school, like, it's very Jewish, right? It's very, very Jewish. The only holidays that they observe at the new school are Jewish holidays, even though it's a secular institution. And it's a very sensitive kind of issue. And so, like, normally when people read Levinas, they're reading him through this like lens of, oh, all that we care about is the Holocaust. The Holocaust is the worst thing that ever happened. And he's a Jewish thinker. He survived the Holocaust. He's talking about it. So we'll read him in that way, which means that people read him as a Jew. Now, look, he is one. And it's his Jewishness that gives him this ability to like really think about what it is that to say that you're stuck to who you are. You're stuck to your being, because he was stuck to his Jewishness at a time where it's very fucking inconvenient to be Jewish, right? Like, and arguably it's always inconvenient. So it gives him some perspective. Same with Arendt, right? But everybody always wanted Arendt to be the Jew, speak as the Jew. And she's like, look, I'm a Jew. It's a thing about me. It's a thing I found out about myself thanks to the Holocaust. But actually, I am only a human insofar as I can speak to the universal. That's what she says. And I think in a sort of sense, Levinas is done a huge disservice by reducing him to just being a Jewish person. And the reason that's true is because, like, I mean, here's an example of why that's true. The way that, for instance, the Pittsburgh Continental Philosophy Network reads him is in the midst of like 50 other great Jewish thinkers, most of whom aren't actual philosophers. Philosophy doesn't read Levinas, and then when it does, it reads him as a Jewish thinker among a bunch of other Jewish thinkers. No, he's an intervention in philosophy. He is an intervention in political theory. He is an intervention against the Western history of philosophy itself. That's how to read him. Now look, he's got his Talmudic writings. He's got his actual theology, which he keeps radically separate from his work. Well, these people who want to act like, oh, no, actually, he's fundamentally like this Jewish thinker. What they want to do is say, yeah, but actually, you have to read his Talmudic writings alongside his philosophical writings to really understand him. And then you'll see the two go together hand in hand. But they don't understand this radical skepticism of phenomenology as a method for philosophy. They don't understand what it means. They don't understand why it matters. And so, no, we have to read Levinas as a philosopher who's critiquing philosophy, who was extremely adamant and repetitive about how you have to separate his Talmudic musings from what he's doing when it comes to his philosophical work. He was profoundly impacted by Husserl and Heidegger in this sense of philosophy trying to be scientific, of it trying to be radically skeptical, and of it being, look, you can be a Catholic, you can be an atheist, but when you do philosophy, you step outside of that and you do philosophy with the big kids, okay? He's trying to be one of the big kids, and we got all these people over here like, no, no, no. We'll put him back in his little fucking caricature outfit. Fuck that. He's a real philosopher. Okay, with that said, I know this was like a huge break away from the text. It was like 20 minutes. Norman Finkelstein, Holocaust industry, all of that, Disneyland. But it is something I've meant to get to. It's something that I consider absolutely essential. And I didn't know when it would come up or when it would fit, but that was the moment. And now we'll get back to it. I'll reread a part of it. He said, the eschatological as the beyond of history draws beings out of the jurisdiction of history and the future. It arouses them in and calls them forth to their full responsibility. Submitting history as a whole to judgment, exterior to the very wars that mark its end, it restores to each instant its full signification in that very instant. All the causes are ready to be heard. It is not the last. That means that the person who was raped and no one was there and no one would believe her, she will have her day. She will be seen. Justice will be served. Like, that's what eschatology is getting at. And it's hard for us stone cold realists. It's hard for us to be like, yeah, that's true. Part of the tragedy of being in, part of like the basis of nihilism is believing that justice won't be served for her. Like, justice will not be found for her. No, not in this world, not in some other. And any idea that justice will be served in some other world is pure ideology that distracts people from seeking justice here and now. But he's saying, no, all of these causes will be heard. And by the way, I hope I don't have to be giving trigger warnings in a course on ethics. I think one of the biggest problems in the history of philosophy in contemporary academia is this idea that we're going to have to use trigger warnings when talking about history, or talking about politics, or talking about philosophy, all three of which you absolutely cannot do without constantly going to limit cases. You constantly have to do them. So for the rest of this time,
Trigger warning.
And we'll keep going. It is not the last judgment that is decisive, but the judgment of all the instants in time when the living are judged. The eschatological notion of judgment, contrary to the judgment of history in which Hegel wrongly saw its rationalization, implies that beings have an identity before eternity, before in scare quotes, before the accomplishment of history, before the fullness of time, while there is still time. So I think the word identity here is not like this superficial expression of oneself, but he's saying there is a you there, a singularity that overflows how you're made sense of in history, okay? And that's before eternity. Now, is it before the idea of eternity? Is it existing in contrast to the idea of eternity? I'm not exactly sure. But it's before the accomplishment of history, before the fullness of time, while there is still time. Which means, like, yeah, you're a fragment of yourself in your full life story. We don't know what you will become. But you are a full, singular human in this moment. We're not the quilting point of the end of your life and how you make it into the history book. No, bullshit. You're here, you're now, you in your fullness are here. He's always going to go back to you are full. You are so full that it becomes oppressive. That's why you want to get out from yourself. That's why you want to distract yourself. It's why you want to pursue every little fleeting pleasure. It's to get out of yourself. So he says, implies, so the eschatological notion of judgment implies that beings exist in relationship, to be sure, but on the basis of themselves and not on the basis of the totality. To say that we exist in relationship, this dialectical approach that says that every point is dependent on the other points through positive and negative associations and identifications and relations that constitute who they are. He's saying, no, not just in the totality, this dialectical totality. Yes, we're in relation, but we're also absolutely singular, is also what he's getting at. He says the idea of being overflowing history makes possible existence, which should be like beings, right? Both involved in being and personal, called upon to answer at their trial and consequently already adult. What does that mean? Consequently already adult. But for that very reason, existence that can speak rather than lending their lips to an anonymous utterance of history. Peace is produced as this aptitude for speech. I didn't get what he means by already adult, but I'll just assume what he means is what I said about you're already here. You are singular, you are full. He's saying, stop deferring this point when you will actually be who you are. No, you're you. Welcome to reality. You're here.
Yeah, I think it's like responsibility. Like you can be held responsible for your actions, even though,
Yeah.
And I mean, that's not to do the whole like bootstraps thing. Like I think that's the opposite of Levinas, I think, the bootstraps. But like, no, you are an agent and you can be kind of called to answer for the things you have done. To emphasize the notion of responsibility, like responsibility as a part of being itself.
It's good. So yeah, I think you're right. And so then he says peace is produced as this aptitude for speech, right? This is the saying, the power of the saying that overflows the said. The saying is right now, guys. Humans can write letters to the future and they can sit there and read stuff that's already been said. But it's our aptitude for speech here and now that can bring peace. And he's going to say speech is essential to forestalling the moment of inhumanity. So he believes that inhumanity is inevitable, that brutality is inevitable. So he is a realist in that sense. But for that glorious time that we play this believing game in some eschatological future, we are able to speak, to be full humans. And that would mean that in a sort of sense, the Hound in his attempt at redemption and working with those utopians is sort of vindicated. He's saying, no, like they were doing the right thing. Same with like when Arya and the Hound like rob the old man and his son. They say, oh yeah, we'll work for you in the summer. And then they end up just banging them on the head and taking their shit. It's like that guy who was not running away with his son, who was like, look, man, I'm not going to spend my life running from inhumanity. I'm going to be a good person and just try to do my best. Well, eventually it caught up with him. But the point is that the moment of inhumanity can be forestalled. It can be deferred. And it is deferred through speech, through people using their agency to actually communicate. He says the eschatological vision breaks with the totality of wars and empires in which one does not speak. Right? In the totality of wars and empires, there is no speech. It does not envisage the end of history within being understood as a totality, but institutes a relation with the infinity of being which exceeds the totality. The first vision of eschatology, hereby distinguished from the revealed opinions of positive religions, reveals the very possibility of eschatology, that is, the breach of the totality, the possibility of a signification without a context. I already said this. This is basically where he's saying, like, it doesn't matter what the positive vision of one of the positive religions is. The fact that they all speak of some kind of eschatological future says that there's something in us that is able to make this appeal to that kind of reality. There's something there, is what he's trying to say. The experience of morality does not proceed from this vision. It consummates this vision. Ethics is an optics. It's one of the famous quotes by Levinas. Ethics is an optics, which means ethics is a way of seeing. To complicate matters, I do have to say this really quick here. The way I talk about morality and ethics, so I'll just put it on the board here. Morality, not the same as ethics. It has always been morality is the deeply personal, and ethics is primarily social. And colloquially, you see that with business ethics and health industry ethics and the ethics of consumption. And ethics always speaks of the social, whereas morality speaks about your heart, your moral compass, right? Your inner life. And the two relate, but it's interesting how they relate. And it's going to be different for every thinker. Ultimately, you are all thinkers. You all have to square that circle on your own. But the problem is the way this is all translated. Every time Levinas says ethics, I would say morality. So he's using the two words interchangeably. While doing this text, I will just use those words interchangeably the way he does. I'll clean up the pieces later because I do think it is important to keep them separated, but for reasons that don't matter right now. Ethics is an optics, but it is a vision without image, bereft of the synoptic and totalizing, objectifying virtues of vision, of relation for an intentionality of a wholly different type, which this work seeks to describe. Bereft of the synoptic and totalizing, objectifying virtues of vision. So, vision, most vision, the way we see things, reduces everything into a sort of one or two dimensional kind of worldview. And he's saying the ethics as optics is not that kind of vision at all, right? He's saying it's something else. It's what this work seeks to describe. There's a profound way of seeing things that we do not feel or we are not accustomed to that is intuitive and is a more plausible account of reality and the way things works than what we take to be true, than what we have assumed to be true as given. He says, is relationship with being produced only in representation the natural locus of evidence? Does objectivity, whose harshness and universal power is revealed in war, provide the unique and primordial form in which being, when it is distinguished from image, dream, and subjective abstraction, imposes itself on consciousness? Is the apprehension of an object equivalent to the very movement in which the bonds with truth are woven? These questions the present work answers in the negative, which is to say he is saying everything philosophy and especially phenomenology has assumed he is arguing against. Of peace there can be only an eschatology, but this does not mean that when affirmed objectively it is believed by faith instead of being known by knowledge. So he's not going to be making some kind of an argument on the basis of faith. He says, it means, first of all, that peace does not take place in the objective history disclosed by war as the end of that war or as the end of history. But does not the experience of war refute eschatology as it refutes morality? Have we not begun by acknowledging the irrefutable evidence of totality? Yeah, I mean, that's literally how this started. He says, to tell the truth, ever since eschatology has opposed peace to war, the evidence of war has been maintained in an essentially hypocritical civilization that is attached both to the true and the good. and to the good, henceforth antagonistic. It is perhaps time to see in hypocrisy not only a base contingent defect of man, but the underlying rending of a world attached to both the philosophers and the prophets. But does not the experience of war and totality coincide for the philosopher with the experience of evidence as such? And is not philosophy itself, after all, defined as an endeavor to live a life beginning in evidence, opposing the opinion of one's fellow men, the illusions and caprice of one's own subjectivity? Right? So you're supposed to call into question the doxa of the other and also your own assumptions. That's what philosophy is supposed to do. And we're supposed to look for evidence instead of just believing things. Does not the eschatology of peace outside of this evidence live on subjective opinions and illusions? Unless philosophical evidence refers from itself to a situation that can no longer be stated in terms of totality, unless the non-knowing with which the philosophical knowing begins coincides not with pure nothingness, but only with a nothingness of objects, ... Without substituting eschatology for philosophy, without philosophically demonstrating eschatological truths, in quotes, we can proceed from the experience of totality back to a situation where totality breaks up, a situation that conditions the totality itself. Wait, what? So he's saying we can proceed from the experience of totality back to a situation where totality breaks up. This would be the philosophical, sort of phenomenological approach. As you start with what's given, we can work our way back to where it actually falls apart, right? The conditions of the totality itself are in the infinity that he already introduced. That's what's going to be going on here. I'll draw it on the whiteboard in a logical proposition. The logical proposition goes like this. If infinity, then totality. I need a symbol for totality. I don't have one. But he's saying infinity is the condition of totality. Such a situation is a gleam of exteriority, the radical outside, or of transcendence in the face of the other, right? He's going to take the something more than just the visible exterior of you, the something that comes through the edges of a person's voice from time to time, the something more that calls you to conscience as a clue, as a hint that there is some outside of what we take for granted. There is some outside of the totality. He says the rigorously developed concept of this transcendence is expressed by the term infinity. So he's saying the rigorously developed concept of this transcendence. He's writing the preface, right? The preface is something he wrote after writing the book. So he's saying, yep, I wrote it. I have rigorously developed the concept of transcendence, and I use this term infinity to get at it. He says, this revelation of infinity does not lead to the acceptance of any dogmatic content, whose philosophical rationality cannot be argued for in the name of the transcendental truth of the idea of infinity. That's important, guys. This revelation of infinity does not result in the acceptance of any dogmatic content. And I think in like a Žižekian sense, the idea is that a prescriptive morality believed dogmatically is often the sort of legitimation narrative of supreme evil. It's the pervert doing absolutely evil things to other people because they think that they are on the right side of history. He's saying, guess what? The revelation of infinity opens up the question. It decenters your certitude. It makes you skeptical that you are on the right side of history. It makes you hesitate to actually shoot those people against the wall. It makes you hesitate to actually push those people into the train cars. It makes you stop for a second and let the prisoner run off into the woods. It's that moment of like, like you hear these stories in trench warfare when they were just so burnt out on killing each other. And then there's like these moments of like, oh, they're about to kill each other. And then they go, okay, let's just go the other way, guys. And like these would happen all the time, right? War is filled with these moments of actually, I'm going to let that guy run off into the woods. I can't, I'm not going to kill it. I'm not going to kill that person. These moments break through. He says, for the way we are describing to work back and remain this side of objective certitude resembles what has come to be called the transcendental method, in which the technical procedures of transcendental idealism need not necessarily be comprised. So he's saying, I can respect this Kantian Husserlian approach to philosophy. I don't necessarily have to use all of the same method or concepts, but I am staying within the tradition of Kant and Husserl, which is to say, I'm not going to make sort of speculative, metaphysical justifications for my ethics. Yes, that's what the idea of eschatology would lead one to believe. I have a friend in philosophy who read the first couple pages of the preface and was like, "Oh yeah, dude, I love Levinas. I love how he uses eschatology to base his ethics." And I was like, "Yeah, dude, you got to read the next page where he says he's not going to do that, and that there is no like content to it. He's just using it as a clue." Okay. Would the violence which for a mind consists in welcoming a being to which it is inadequate contradict the ideal of autonomy that guides philosophy, which is evidence, which in evidence is mistress of her own truth? But the relation with infinity, the idea of the infinite, as Descartes calls it, overflows thought in a wholly different sense than does opinion. Opinion vanishes like the wind when thought touches it, or is revealed to be already within that thought. What remains ever exterior to thought is thought in the idea of infinity. It is the condition for every opinion, as also for every objective truth. I think he actually does prove this, guys. You'll see why, but I actually think that what he's calling infinity is the foundation of both opinion and objective truth, including all scientific knowledge, all rationalizations that we do, is based on this face-to-face moment that is a constant recurrence, as we're talking about in that previous lecture, microdosing the face of the other. It is the condition for every opinion, as also for every objective truth. The idea of infinity is the mind before it lends itself to the distinction between what it discovers by itself and what it receives from opinion. So before the split between objectivity and opinion, before the split even has occurred, there is this thing that he wants to get at called infinity. The relation with infinity cannot, to be sure, be stated in terms of experience, for infinity overflows the thought that thinks it. Its very infinition. He turns infinity into a verb. Its very infinition is produced precisely in this overflowing. The relation with infinity will have to be stated in terms other than those of objective experience. But if experience precisely means a relation with the absolutely other, that is, with what always overflows thought, the relation with infinity accomplishes experience in the fullest sense of the word. Finally, the eschatological vision does not oppose to the experience of totality the protestation of a person in the name of his personal egoism or even of his salvation. Such a proclamation of morality based on the pure subjectivism of the I is refuted by war, the totality it reveals, and the objective necessities. We oppose to the objectivism of war a subjectivity born from the eschatological vision. The idea of infinity delivers the subjectivity from the judgment of history to declare it ready for judgment at every moment, and we shall show, called to participate in this judgment, impossible without it. The harsh law of war breaks up not against an impotent subjectivism cut off from being, but against the infinite, more objective than objectivity. Do the particular beings yield their truth in a whole in which their exteriority vanishes? Or, on the contrary, is the ultimate event of being enacted in the outburst of this exteriority? Our initial question now assumes this form. Whoa. Okay. Our initial question now assumes what form? That the ultimate event of being is enacted in the outburst of exteriority, which is to say, the particular beings yield their truth in a whole in which their exteriority vanishes? No, the opposite of that. The opposite of that. We do not yield our truth in a whole in which our exteriority vanishes. Exteriority means exteriority from thought, exteriority from politics, exteriority from history, that infinite overflowing of the said. What overflows the said? It is the saying. The saying and the infinite are both kind of getting us to the same thing. And there's something in the experience of the radically new that always is possible and that we see glimpsed through from time to time that can't be predicted within the totality, right? People think that, oh, if you could just have a computer that could understand every movement of every atom, then you could predict everything that's going to happen in the future, right? This was an idea of a mechanistic universe, a purely mechanistic universe. The point is that there's something in what he's calling infinity that bursts through, that overflows, that brings in the genuinely new. It breaks repetition so that actually the opposite is the case of what supposedly King Solomon said in Ecclesiastes when he says that there's nothing new under the sun. The most conservative sentiment in the history of the world is that there's nothing new under the sun. Levinas is saying that's bullshit. There is radical newness and radical opportunities for a changing course that completely defy our expectations. This book then does present itself as a defense of subjectivity, but it will apprehend the subjectivity not at the level of its purely egoist protestation against totality. It's not going to just, be his opinion. I don't like totality. That's not what he's saying. Nor in its anguish before death, but as founded in the idea of infinity. It will proceed to distinguish between the idea of totality and the idea of infinity, and affirm the philosophical primacy of the idea of infinity. It will recount how infinity is produced in the relationship of the same with the other, and how the particular and the personal, which are unsurpassable, as it were, magnetize the very field in which the production of infinity is enacted. The term production designates both the effectuation of being, the event is produced, an automobile is produced, and its being brought to light or its exposition. An argument is produced, an actor is produced. His little note, I won't read it, it doesn't matter. The ambiguity of this verb conveys the essential ambiguity of the operation by which the being of an entity simultaneously is brought about and is revealed. The idea of infinity is not an incidental notion forged by a subjectivity to reflect the case of an entity encountering on the outside nothing that limits it, overflowing every limit, and thereby infinite. So he's not talking about just like, oh yeah, you've got like this like whimsical subject who's just like, oh, there's just like infinite possibilities, brother. No, he's not saying that. The production of the infinite entity is inseparable from the idea of infinity, for it is precisely in the disproportion between the idea of infinity and the infinity of which it is the idea that the exceeding of limits is produced. Okay, I wrote a question mark there because I found that very confusing. If anybody thought that just made sense, unmute yourself and let me know right now. I'm very curious. I'm very confused by it. He says, the production of the infinite entity is inseparable from the idea of infinity, for it is precisely in the disproportion between the idea of infinity and the infinity of which it is the idea that this exceeding of limits is produced. So there's the idea.
Like,
Yeah, go.
like is it Russell's incompleteness theorem? Like the set of all sets, blah blah blah. But like, so the idea of infinity is already contained within infinity itself. And so it's like there's a tension. I mean, even in us trying to like conceptualize the infinity as such, like our idea, it's contained within the infinity in
Okay.
itself.
Yeah. That's good. No, you nailed it. Yeah, the idea of infinity versus the infinity of which it is the idea. Okay. The point is, you can't totalize infinity by calling it infinity. But that's instantly what our brain is going to do. He's going to get to the point where he says, not just politics, not just history, not just reason, not just rationality. Cognition itself is totalization. Language, it's not just language. It's not just hardwired into language. Cognition itself totalizes. Which means that, like ressentiment for Nietzsche and Deleuze, this is foundational for everything. We are the beings who totalize. But the condition of possibility for us being able to totalize in the first place is the infinite overflowing of, like you just said, the set of all sets that is infinity. And then tech bros be like, oh, computer will swallow it whole. Oh yeah, dude. Great idea. Great idea. Computer will swallow it whole. We will upload to it and be happy. We will live forever. The idea of infinity is the mode of being, the infinition of infinity. Infinity does not first exist and then reveal itself. Its infinition is produced as revelation, as a positing of its idea in me. Italicize, me. It is produced in the improbable feat whereby a separated being fixed in its identity, the same, the I, nonetheless contains in itself what it can neither contain nor receive solely by virtue of its own identity. There's something extimate in us that can't be totalized, is what he's saying. Subjectivity realizes these impossible exigencies, the astonishing feat of continuing more than it is possible to contain. This book will present subjectivity as welcoming the other, as hospitality. In it, the idea of infinity is consummated. Hence, intentionality, when thought remains in adequation with the object, does not define consciousness at its fundamental level, which is to say, Husserlian intentionality does not define consciousness at the fundamental level. All-knowing qua intentionality already presupposes the idea of infinity, which is preeminently non-adequation. Adequation would be like A equals A. And the point is he's working within this sort of phenomenological method tradition, right? He's a student of Husserl and Heidegger. And he's just like, yeah, guys, the intentional sort of like intentionality is a way that Husserl gets beyond this separation between subject and object, where objectivity is more important than subjects and therefore nihilism. And he goes, actually, it's impossible to talk about any objects that are not objects for us. It's an act of faith to start talking about an objectivity separate from us. When Quentin Miyasu in After Finitude talks about, well, yeah, but the problem with guys like Kant and Husserl and Heidegger is that they can't make sense of fossils because fossils didn't exist for them. The simple comeback from the Husserlian standpoint is, like, yeah, like something exists outside of us. That doesn't mean that we can make sense of the statement fossils exist without them existing for us. And considering the fact that fossils are used as a foil against certain accounts of religion, means that they fundamentally only matter for us. We only talk about fossils insofar as it has some kind of an implication on our actual ontology. Fossils do only matter for us, philosophically speaking. Yeah, we can still talk about, like, in some kind of thought experiment, they exist without us. They existed before us. Yeah, but who gives a shit? So it's kind of just absolutely insane to me that these speculative realists were like, oh my God, Quentin Mises, what a genius. What a great he's smarter than Husserl and Heidegger. Oh my God. Wow. Quentin Mises, in 60 pages, destroyed 200 years of philosophy. What a pimp, guys. Oh my God. Like, give it up. Yeah, Mises. He gets it. No. But with all that said, intentionality says everything is for my consciousness. And philosophically, phenomenology says, yes, we have to just kind of work through ideas and phenomena from the standpoint of how, like, thinking through how they exist for us, thinking about how we don't have access to the things themselves. We have access to the concepts and cognitions and cogitations that we make about the things. And so we don't have access to the things themselves. We have access to thinking about the things. So therefore, we can develop some kind of a method that breaks through the subject-object divide and then is able to, through intentionality, think about how these things exist for us. Okay. But Levinas is, no. He's like, no, guys. Intentionality, yeah, it's real, but it's not the fundamental basis here. Husserl, and then later Heidegger, they want to get to the fundamental, most real things that are the hardest for us to see and hardest for us to think because they're too close to us, right? Phenomenology always wants to make weird what is closest and seems normal. He goes, yeah, well, there's something deeper, guys. To contain more than one's capacity does not mean to embrace or to encompass the totality of being in thought, or at least to be able to account for it after the fact, but the inward play of constitutive thought. To contain more than one's capacity is to shatter at every moment the framework of a content that is thought, to cross the barriers of immanence, right? Immanence versus transcendence, that which is inside, right? To contain more than one's capacity is to shatter at every moment the framework of a content that is thought, to cross the barriers of immanence. But without this descent into being reducing itself anew to a concept of descent. Philosophers have sought to express with the concept of act, or of the incarnation that makes it possible, right? That makes the act possible. This descent into the real, which the concept of thought interpreted as a pure knowing would maintain only as a play of lights. The act of thought as an act, would precede the thought thinking or becoming conscious of an act. The notion of act involves a violence essentially, the violence of transitivity, lacking in the transcendence of thought. For the transcendence of thought remains closed in itself despite all its adventures, which in the last analysis are purely imaginary, or are adventures traversed as by Ulysses on the way home. What in action breaks forth as essential violence is the surplus of being over the thought that claims to contain it, the marvel of the idea of infinity. Philosophers have traditionally thought they can understand everything, theoretically. He's saying action breaks through constantly. Practical life ruptures our attempts to totalize, understand everything. I think that's what he's getting at. The incarnation of consciousness is therefore comprehensible only if, over and beyond adequation, the overflowing of the idea by its ideatum, that is, the idea of infinity, moves consciousness. The idea of infinity, which is not a representation of infinity, sustains activity itself. Theoretical thought, knowledge, and critique to which activity has been opposed have the same foundation. The idea of infinity, which is not in its turn a representation of infinity, is the common source of activity and theory. Just very important there. When he says the idea of infinity, he's not talking about the concept. He's saying like the fact of the overflowing of the saying over the said, and the rupture of our attempts to totalize, reduce, comprehend, cognize, all of that. That is the motor of both theory and practice. And I think that he's right. And I look forward to getting into why. I'm not going to get too into it right now, but there's a reason why, guys. There's several. He's going to be unpacking this experience, this fundamental experience of this face-to-face. Like the rigorously developed concept of the face throughout this text is his lifelong mission to articulate it, right? And to articulate that, to try over and over again, is to deepen this ethics as an optics throughout his whole philosophical career. Derrida said that his thinking, Derrida says this in his speech that he gave at Levinas's funeral. Derrida says that Levinas's thinking was like a wave crashing on the beach. And it's fundamentally this moment, this face-to-face moment, that is driving the whole thing for him. So even if he's wrong about infinity being what drives all theory and practice, it drives his. It certainly drives Levinas's. Consciousness then does not consist in equaling being with representation, intending to the full light in which this adequation is to be sought, but rather in overflowing this play of lights, this phenomenology, and in accomplishing events whose ultimate signification, contrary to the Heideggerian conception, does not lie in disclosing. Philosophy does indeed discover the signification of these events, but they are produced without discovery or truth being their destiny. No prior disclosure illuminates the production of these essential nocturnal events. Nocturnal events, that's right. I forget how he uses that term, nocturnal events. So he just brought in phenomenology and Heideggerian disclosing, and he will equate that to light. This is why he talks about nocturnal events. Those belong to the night. And so later when he'll say that the woman, or the essentially feminine, belongs to the night, Lucy Irigaray like, "You misogynist bastard." And Simon Critchley in his The Problem with Levinas is like, yeah, but what Lucy Irigaray doesn't realize is that like Levinas's whole point is that like the night is it's like good. Like that's a good thing. like it's the thing that escapes this rationalization. It's the thing that escapes our attempts to conquer, to dominate. It's the thing that overflows and eventually wins out for Levinas. The welcoming of the face and the work of justice, which condition the birth of truth itself, are not interpretable in terms of disclosure. Phenomenology is a method for philosophy, but phenomenology, the comprehension effected through a bringing to light, does not constitute the ultimate event of being itself. The relation between the same and the other is not always reducible to knowledge of the other by the same, nor even to the revelation of the other to the same, which is already fundamentally different from disclosure. Now, this is where he's going to mention Franz Rosenzweig's Stern du Erscheinung, right? He says, we were impressed by the opposition of the idea of totality in Franz Rosenzweig's Stern du Erscheinung, which I think translates as star, the star of something, I forget what, it doesn't matter. A work too often present in this book to be cited. So basically, he owes this idea of totality to this guy, Franz Rosenzweig. And that book is essentially a work of theology that argues that the history of Western philosophy has been an attempt to reduce everything to one versus actual reality, which is a multitude that cannot be reduced to one. But sort of this Parmenideity, okay, Say it for me. Come on, how do you say that guy's name?
Paramenidian. Because it's
Yeah.
Paramenides. So Paramenidian. Paramenidian? Who gives
Yeah,
a
there you
shit?
go. Parmenidean. The idea that all being is one, everything is one, right? For the pre-Socratics, everything is like, oh, everything's fire. No, everything's water. No, everything is this. No, everything is that. And then eventually later you have like Spinoza's like, everything is God and God is everything. And then like, oh no, everything is monads. Like philosophers just always want to make everything into one. And Levinas was reading Franz Rosenzweig, and then he was like, God damn, even Heidegger did that with being. Fuck. Just thinking about being. He's just totalizing everything. Shit. No wonder he was a Nazi. I'm joking, but like that's kind of true. All right. So anyway, he says, but the presentation and the development of the notions employed owe everything to the phenomenological method. So though he gets the idea of totality from this Franz guy, you don't need to go read him because everything he's doing, he's just going to do it using the phenomenological method. He says, intentional analysis is a search for the concrete. Notions held under the direct gaze of the thought that defines them are nevertheless unbeknown to this naive thought, revealed to be implanted in horizons unsuspected by this thought. These horizons endow them with a meaning, such as the essential teaching of Husserl. What does it matter if in the Husserlian phenomenology taken literally these unsuspected horizons are in their turn interpreted as thoughts aiming at objects? What counts is the idea of the overflowing of objectifying thought by a forgotten experience from which it lives, the breakup of the formal structure of thought, the noema of a noesis, which is to say, the thought thing of the thinking process, right? So it's like the perceived by the perceiving. But it's like a mental construct that we use to make sense of the thing itself. Like I don't have direct access to this pen itself. This pen is a concept in my head. I have a cognition of it. I perceive it, which is to say, I only have the subjective side of it, the side where it's existing for me in this sort of Kantian sense. This pen for you and for me is a noema of a noesis. The noesis is the mental act of constructing it, of rendering it intelligible within our world. Okay. He says the breakup of the formal structure of thought, the noema of a noesis, into events which the structure dissimulates, but which sustain it and restore its concrete significance, constitutes a deduction, necessary and yet non-analytical. In our exposition, it is indicated by expressions such as that is, or precisely, or this accomplishes that, or this is produced as that. The signification in the present work, and we're almost done, by the way. I know. We're almost done. Thanks for staying with me this far. Fucking A. I can't believe I still have most of you here. It's awesome. I'm used to just doing readings with Nance, but it's really great to have you all here. And I saw Christopher said something in the chat a little bit ago. I hope that if any of you have any thoughts sort of inspired by this reading or any questions, that we'll have a moment towards the end to go over those. The signification that in the present work, phenomenological deduction shows to underline the theoretical thought concerning being and the panoramic exposition of being itself is not irrational. So he's not going to do an irrational thing here. He's not anti-rational. The aspiration to radical exteriority, thus called metaphysical, the respect for this metaphysical exteriority, which, above all, we must let be, constitutes truth. So we'll find out what he means by metaphysics a little bit later. It animates this work and evinces its allegiance to the intellectualism of reason. But theoretical thought, guided by the ideal of objectivity, does not exhaust this aspiration. It remains this side of its ambitions. If, as this book will show, ethical relations are to lead transcendence to its term, this is because the essential of ethics is in its transcendent intention, and because not every transcendent intention has the noesis noema structure. Already of itself, ethics is an optics. It is not limited to preparing for the theoretical exercise of thought, which would monopolize transcendence. The traditional opposition between theory and practice will disappear before the metaphysical transcendence by which a relation with the absolutely other, or truth, is established, and of which ethics is the royal road. Hitherto, the relation between theory and practice was not conceivable other than as a solidarity or a hierarchy. Activity rests on cognitions that illuminate it. Knowledge requires from acts the mastery of matter, minds, and societies, a technique, a morality, a politics that procures the peace necessary for its pure exercise. We shall go further and, at the risk of appearing to confuse theory and practice, deal with both as modes of metaphysical transcendence. The apparent confusion is deliberate and constitutes one of the theses of this book. Okay, which apparent confusion? At the risk of appearing to confuse theory and practice, deal with both as modes of metaphysical transcendence. So this apparent confusion between theory and practice is deliberate and constitutes one of the theses of the book. And obviously we just said it on the previous page or the page before last, that infinity is the ground of both theory and practice. So that is one of the theses of the book. Husserlian phenomenology has made possible this passage from ethics to metaphysical exteriority. Metaphysical exteriority. So, I mean, this is like the great outside, the great outdoors. But for Nick Land, that is this hell-screaming, dark, fanged, numinous night, right? It's this Lovecraftian nightmare. Whereas for Levinas, we can't really say much about that outside. Nick Land spends a lot of time sort of projecting his whatever into it. Levinas is like, no, I've got reasons to believe that what's actually there is something that means that we're fundamentally responsible to one another. That's basically what he's going to do here. So that means that in our attempt to counter the CCRU in some kind of a way, everyone will have their own way of doing it, whether they become hardcore CCRU fans through and through and just want to elaborate on that project or copy paste it. Or if we want to actually combat it, to be able to say, no, there is something worth fighting for in the human. There is something in the human that overflows the categories and the instrumentalized reason and the totalization that results in this prophecy of a, techno capital AI singularity. Well, if you want to do that battle, if you want to take up that position of the human, the resolutely human, Levinas was already my guy for that. I think he's already the best guy for that. Levinas plus Illich is perfect for that. But even when he was already it's going to be through Levinas, I was not thinking about how they're both thinkers of the outside. It's so fucking cool that Nick Land and Levinas are both profound thinkers of the outside. Okay. But how is he going to argue that metaphysics, fundamental reality, is ethical as opposed to some fanged noumena? That's the big question of this text. All right, where are we? How far are we? Yeah. Wait. No, on this page or the actual final paragraph?
Oh, I thought that last one was a continuation of this one, but it's a separate one. So
okay,
the penultimate.
Okay, yeah. How far we are in this preface from the theme of the work announced by the first sentence. Already there is question of so many other things, even in these preliminary lines, which ought to state without detours the intent of the work undertaken. Philosophical research, in any case, does not answer questions like an interview, an oracle, or wisdom. And can one speak of a book as though one had not written it, as though one were its first critic? Can one thus undo the inevitable dogmatism that gathers up and gauges an exposition in pursuit of its theme. It will appear in the eyes of the reader so naturally indifferent to the vicissitudes of this chase as a thicket of difficulties where nothing guarantees the presence of game. What kind of game is he talking about? The presence of game. Like pickup artistry? Is that what he's talking about?
Or like deer and turkey?
I think he means turkeys for sure. We should like at least to invite him not to be rebuffed by the aridity and certain pathways, by the labor of the first section, whose preparatory character is to be emphasized, but in which the horizon of this whole research takes form. Okay, that's very important. Listen, you're reading this book, presumably. If you're following along with this lecture course, you're in it. You're in it to win it. What he's saying is, listen, dear reader, don't be overthrown by how dry I get sometimes, the aridity of certain pathways, or by how difficult the first section will be, right? That's what he means by the labor of the first section. Don't get defeated by it, guys. Don't get too bogged down. He says it's preparatory. It's all preparatory. It's all like just setting the groundwork for what's to come. That's all he's doing at the beginning. And ultimately, that's where he's setting up the horizon of the whole research. Final paragraph. He says, the word, by way of preface, which seeks to break through the screen stretched between the author and the reader by the book itself, does not give itself out as a word of honor, but it belongs to the very essence of language, which consists in continually undoing its phrase by the foreword or the exegesis, in unsaying the said, in attempting to restate without ceremonies what has already been ill understood in the inevitable ceremonial in which the said delights. Which is really just a paragraph that says, hey, prefaces are impossible. Hegel was right. You can't write a preface, but ultimately the reason is because the saying overflows the said. And I, as an author, am going to try my best to finish this out without saying too much about the actual book. I want to establish a couple of themes and leave the rest of it open. You read it yourself. I'm not going to fucking recapitulate the whole project here. So there you go. That's the preface. I did an exegetical of it because for the rest of this text, I'm going to be doing lectures that prepare us to then go over it in the book discussions. But for the preface itself, since we're not going to do a discussion about the preface, I wanted to just read it out and kind of give you a sense for how I am reading it, right? You'll get to see plenty of examples of how I read it in the discussion group stuff that we do. But the rest of the lectures, the official lectures of this series, I'm just going to take a handful of fundamental concepts or experiences that he's developing, and then I'll riff on it and just do a proper lecture. But no, I wanted you to all have this experience of like, this is how I read Levinas. This is how he sounds. It's a little crazy. It's a little bit much. But also, I wanted to show you sentence for sentence. It makes sense. He is saying something. So even when you're like, what the fuck? It's just a weird way of saying it, but he is actually, I was going to say he's speaking English, but, yeah, it can be read in English. That's the point. So thank you.
I'm definitely excited to get through this. I said it earlier in our earlier discussion that is once again disconnected from this reading, but I think Levinas has a lot to say about the world we live in today and the tendencies and the direction things seem to be moving in. And I hope more and more people become acquainted with Levinas and actually do a serious reading. I'm stoked to go through it. And I'm looking forward to the conversations that come up. I think right now, like the biggest question that jumps out to me just from going through the preface, like the idea of positivity and overflowing the container, that being what is the terror, whereas the outside, like Levinas's outside, it's, I think, to me, I think it's at worst neutral, and also at best neutral. Like I think he's just saying like, no, it is this unknown thing, um, and making appeals to an eschatology, to a situation where the telos has been completed, and then judgments will be passed, and you will, of course, you'll be found on the right side of history. Of course you will, because you're you. Um, I think I like the way he's like, no, that's all bullshit. The outside is the outside. We're not going to try to figure out what it is. We're going to do the here and now. I like it. And I also do agree with being horrified and being terrorized by being and like looking for that escape.
Mm. Yeah, man. I don't know. Like, I think that the idea of the outside is kind of just the beginning, and that a couple steps in, it'll become impossible to really contrast. Um, well, it'll never be impossible to contrast Nick Land and Emmanuel Levinas, but like the conversation will break down really fast, because one of them is basically meaning like a material universe where he's just like, oh, deep history and also the future is like this techno AI singularity and occult shit. Like that, it's it's going to be hard. I'm not going to say it's impossible. I'm not going to say that I want to do it, but it's going to be hard, and it's a challenge worth taking on for anyone else who wants to make them speak together, right? Um, because what he's getting at with the outside, it's like the anonymous rustling of the there is. What does that actually have to do with the face-to-face relationship? Now, it'll be the project of these lectures to get at that and to unpack it. But I think a person would be rightfully skeptical and go right back into Trotsky brain, into Hitler brain, into totalizing CIA brain, and just be like, oh yeah, well, that's cute. A lot of fancy words for, you know, you're still that guy. You know, Levinas, you're still that guy. You're still that guy who is naive about war and about politics, right? Like it's, I think that he gets at something here, though, and I think that the real power of what he's going to do comes down to how he develops subjectivity and its relation to the other and the face-to-face encounter, and then fecundity, what he calls fecundity, which is like the basis for thinking about natality, for thinking about the child, for thinking about intergenerationality, the future. That's where I think he's strongest. This connection with the outside and how the outside relates to the face is going to be, for me, one of the biggest questions. I have actually no idea. Like, I know it's there. I mean, it's on the page. We read it, but I'm actually confused about that. Yeah. So,
Oh yeah.
Christopher said that Game of Thrones. So he said this a long time ago. He said Game of Thrones has spiraled him into a depression and made him think everyone was manipulative and that it's very nihilistic. Yeah. Yeah. And then he said, appreciate you guys doing this. Been pumped for it. Dude, I'm fucking stoked that you're pumped about it. I think I saw you posting on Instagram like some pictures of the Levinas, and that's awesome. Really, so honestly, like Levinas is like the most underrated thinker on the internet. You can find a couple of things on YouTube that relate to him, but you just won't find the serious like engagement with him. And thanks to a lecture by Leswin Laubscher when he was a keynote speaker at a conference, And the fact that Mikey had been reading Totality and Infinity and posting about it a lot, we'd had some conversations about this like 7 or 8 years ago. I finally decided no, I've already read Being in Time, so now I'm going to dive into Totality and Infinity. And I read it over Christmas break, and it was the most difficult thing I'd ever done up to that point. And I didn't know what I was really getting from it until later. And certain things clicked. And when those certain things clicked, it was like, it's kind of freedom, man. Like the biggest freedom in the world is realizing that that even without a dogmatic, faith-based eschatology, there is this sort of like, the stage of history, you want to be on it or you want to impact it. Or maybe, and just the or maybe that Levinas forces is so freeing, because otherwise we're just one of 8 billion people, and you got to be like a lotto winner to even get remembered. And then being remembered's like, for what? And people go fucking kill other people. They do mass, shootings just so that their name can be added to the history book. And it's like, dude, because people want attention, and any attention is better than no attention, right? And it's like, to return to the priority of the face-to-face, and to raise interpersonal relationships to the dignity of the concept. Just a beautiful, amazing thing. And so, yeah, I want to thank you all for being here, for doing this with me, for being excited about this text. It really is like something that I've been dreading. I've been terrorized by the idea of teaching Levinas, because I just feel I feel like, well, then I have to go read more Husserl. I have to go read more Heidegger. I have to go read more Levinas. I have to go read some Derrida. It's just like there's so much in the way. Oh shit, you guys can't see me talking? Don't worry. On the OBS side, they can see me. But here, let me fix it so you guys can see me too. Yeah, that's a good heads up though. Christopher said, we need face-to-face. Yeah, we do. Hey man, that's part of why we went on tour. Fucking, actually for real though. Like, there's this magical combination of the hardcore ethos Nance and I have, combining with this priority of the concrete other over the big other, and breaking through the screens, and breaking through the projections, and breaking through totalizations, and forcing the issue. Like, let's actually like meet and like do face-to-face shit, that we owe to Levinas at the end of the day. 2 world tours, baby. Or at least 2 tours that add up to the world, baby. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to close this thing out. Thank you so much, everybody. Stoked for this Saturday. I'm 98% sure I'll be able to find a place to do the lecture from. Okay. I've got like no reason to be so sure. I'm just sure that I'm going to try really fucking hard. I'm going to try so hard to make it work. But I'm going to be at a family reunion out in the middle of nowhere without Wi-Fi. And I'm trying to find like a location to do this lecture from. So I'm working on it. I think it'll work. Where there's a will, there's a way. I do have will to do it. So, all right, everybody. With that, I'm going to close this thing out. Thanks. Peace.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, a place for workers with earbuds who are tired of letting others read and think on their behalf, slipstreaming our way into an understanding of the situation that short-circuits the deadlocks of our moment.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation: theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
Theory Underground is coming to a city near you. What that has meant in the last year is traveling across the United States, into Canada, and then all over Europe to promote our books, courses, and ideas related to time energy and underground theory.
You
you've been reading Underground Theory.
I'm a publisher and an editor. I run and review books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Okay, picture this scene. America, early 2021. An Amazon warehouse worker arises from the emerging underground theory internet scene to create spaces for untimely topics and concerns that are too often neglected or kept in isolation today. Joined by a revolving cast of underground theorists, academics, and critics, he establishes what will become Theory Underground, a teaching, research, and publishing platform by and for working-class intellectuals, autodidacts, and academics who want to do more than they're able to do within the confines of academia. That warehouse worker's name is David McKerracher, and his book Timenergy is his first major contribution to the world of theory. It was recently reprinted with a foreword by none other than Slavoj Žižek, who also contributed to Theory Underground's latest book.
My Bible, it's an excellent book.
A collection of essays called Underground Theory.
What you just heard is an excerpt from the Strange Exiles podcast, episode 23, where Bram from Strange Exiles interviewed me and Mikey. For those who don't know, Mikey is the author of the Dangerous Maybe blog. We are publishing one of his books here shortly at Theory Underground. He's also a lecturer at Theory Underground, and he's someone I've been friends and a collaborator with for over 10 years. But most importantly for you all, he's a fantastic lecturer, and it's a crime that he has to do wage labor right now. One of the long-term goals of Theory Underground has been now for a couple of years to hashtag free Mikey. That is something that I've been really pushing, but first I had to get freed from wage labor, which was achieved this year. That's right. Thanks to my monthly seminar subscribers, I was able to quit Amazon and do Theory Underground full time. Now I'm announcing the next big phase of the plan, which is the Mikey Down Seminar. What monthly subscribers to the Mikey Seminar are paying for is a survey of philosophy, including deep dives into Žižek, Land, Lacan, Baudrillard, Bataille, Lyotard, and ultimately the whole history of philosophy.
We're trying to build like this ongoing seminar, right? And that's what I really like about this thing, where, you know, if I'm teaching a main text, that's something I got to focus on. I got to really, but the seminar thing, we can do this stuff all the time, where we dive deeper into concepts, we dive deeper into certain, you know, sections of books or whatever, and we can really do this nuanced stuff.
I think that there's probably no better way for us to accelerate our learning in these areas than by slipstreaming Mikey. And that has been my belief for years and years and years now. It's official. You're able to help out. You're able to get involved. You're able to benefit directly from liberating him from wage labor. Get on it right now. Do it. Just go. Stop what you're doing. Go click the button, subscribe. This is what you do. Subscribe to him. If you're already signed up for the ongoing Theory Underground seminars, then that's the ones that I do with my wife, Anne. Though that's getting an upgrade, which means that I will be doing one session per month that is just me, and then I will also be doing the ones with Anne, which are a crash course in sociology, anthropology, the social sciences, and ultimately Marx, Heidegger, Levinas, Bourdieu, imminently critiquing pop psychology, sociology, self-help, and ultimately the doxa of our time. But if you would like to be a subscriber to both Mikey's seminar and the seminar that the Snellgrove McKerrachers are doing, then the best way is to become a Tier 4 subscriber, or you can be a Tier 2 subscriber to each of us. The reason this matters is because Tier 2 is like pretty much the best bang for your buck. It gives you huge discounts on all of the courses that we do. But if you can't afford it, Tier 4 is amazing because it gives you Tier 3 access at both Mikey's seminar and ours.
Finally, not everybody has time to be part of these ongoing research seminars, and they just want to fund the paid content for the YouTube and podcast. And so thank you so much to our patrons over at Patreon. They're the ones funding all the free stuff, so big thank you to Bert, Marilyn, Carl, Sahil, Zozandra, Nikolai, Darian, Tyler, and Mandeep, and all the other wonderful patron people. Patreon people. And thank you to all the other wonderful Patreon people. And thank you to all the other wonderful Patreon people. Thank you so much to all of you patrons and also to the special subscribers and the paying subscribers. Oh my god! It's just so awkward. Thank you, Patreon. Patrons. Thank you, okay. And to all the other wonderful patrons. Thank you so much, all you patrons. And also a special thanks to the subscribers on the YouTube side, as well as the paying subscribers over at Substack. Why can't we do this? Fuck. You guys. Please. Just thank you. Thank you, everyone, for making this bullshit possible. Thank you to the subscribers. You do it. You did so good. Thanks, guys.